Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Gosztola. I'm the managing editor for Shadowproof, and I'm joined for this interview by Rania Khalek. Thank you, Rania.
Hey Kevin, how you doing?
Hey there. So we're going to be sending you to the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia next week, and we wanted to talk to you about your plans. So just to start off, as you're looking to the next week, what are you seeing? What do you think you're going to probably be paying close attention to?
Well, there's a couple things. First is protests. There's all kinds of protests planned to take place outside of the DNC from groups ranging from groups that didn't support Sanders because he's not left enough to groups that did support Sanders and are now upset he's not the nominee. The protests seem to be coalescing around the idea of protesting the Democratic establishment and Hillary Clinton. So we're going to see a lot of that taking place outside, and there's been about, I think, $43 million in federal grants have been spent on beefing up the police presence outside of the DNC. They're even building a fence, like a mobile fence around the DNC, which is kind of interesting since the big theme of the nominee is breaking down barriers. But regardless, so there's going to be lots of protests taking place outside, so I'm going to be focused on that as well as what's going on inside. There are some actions planned for, it sounds like, the inside of the DNC among delegates who are unhappy with the establishment of the party and Hillary Clinton. So I'm going to be focusing on that as well, and I should I should be having access to going inside the DNC. So those are two things that I'll be keeping my eye on, is the unrest on the inside and the unrest on the outside.
Yeah, so we're sending you to the Democratic National Convention. We didn't send anybody to the Republican National Convention. And I think that's actually a question to maybe just consider briefly here in our interview for people who might wonder why we picked one over the other. It does seem like, in my quick analysis, I would say that a lot of the establishment is offended by Donald Trump's policies, but there isn't much of a backlash against Hillary Clinton, which maybe makes it more important for protest at the Democratic National Convention. So what's your read on why it might be more important this year to focus on the Democratic National Convention?
So both of these conventions, both the RNC and the DNC, are saturated. The DNC will be saturated with media, just as the RNC is saturated with media at the moment. And with the RNC, though, like you said, the media does seem to be offended by Trump, collectively offended by Trump. And so they're covering the protests on the outside in a really fair way. They're covering what's happening on the inside in a very fair way. And I would add, for example, Code Pink had people on the inside of the RNC unfurling banners that were denouncing Trump and pro-immigrant. Our friend Allie McCracken from Code Pink was bravely going into the RNC and shouted slogans inside against Trump and for refugees. And the response to that was to promote it by the media, the mainstream media. Mainstream journalists were tweeting it, and they posted about it on various outlets in a positive way. Whereas, if that kind of stuff is going, I imagine there will be similar things that will happen at the DNC because Hillary Clinton is no angel, and you're not going to see the same sort of fair coverage. You're going to see much more hostility towards activism. Because people are it seems like people are, the more mainstream establishment is only okay with activism as long as it's against people that they disagree with, and they don't disagree with Hillary Clinton. So I think it's really, really important to have independent media like Shadowproof and others on the ground covering the protests on the outside and what's happening on the inside. And I mean, just looking at what's happened and taken place throughout the Democratic primary, and Kevin, you've covered this, I think, more than most people. The disinformation and the smears, and the anti-Sanders line that was promoted throughout the media during the Democratic primary. That hasn't gone away. There's still great hostility in the establishment against Sanders supporters, against people on the left, and so that's why we need independent outlets there, people like me and others, to basically give you an unfiltered view of what's taking place, because I don't think you're going to hear about it the same way from the mainstream.
Yeah, and I would add that it's also about accuracy, right? So we don't want people to be reporting that chairs were thrown at people if there weren't chairs thrown at people, which, very well could happen at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. So we're happy that someone like you will be there, and that there hopefully will be other independent reporters there to keep their eye on what CNN and MSNBC and these other outlets may be reporting in mass. One other thing I think would be interesting to talk about before in the run-up to the convention is that we had this effort with Never Trump people that basically fizzled out. Now there's this group of people that are Never Hillary, and we don't really know all of their intentions. Some of them are smartly keeping it secret as to what they would like to do in terms of protest. But I think when you hear both of them speak, what's really fascinating to me is that both are dealing with contempt for democracy within their own political party. I guess what would you like to add to that?
Well, with the, whether there is this Never Hillary contingent, there's also like the Bernie or bust people, and they're unhappy with the nominee. But I think that, on the Democratic side, I do have to say it's not necessarily dissatisfaction with democracy. I think it's more dissatisfaction with a system that does seem that people feel is rigged. People feel has been rigged. The media has been was against Bernie Sanders. You had the superdelegates against him. He didn't really stand a chance in a lot of respects against someone like Hillary Clinton, who had the backing of the entire establishment. And there's also a lot of, Hillary Clinton really does represent, she embodies all of the things that people are disillusioned by right now. And I think disillusioned in many ways across the political spectrum, right? Disillusioned with the elites, with elitism, disillusioned with, just like politicians who lie, which are most politicians, but Hillary Clinton represents, really, Hillary Clinton really embodies that sort of style of politician who flip-flops and says one thing but means another, and who reneges on what she says she's going to do. And people are really frightened by Hillary Clinton, the kind of things that she's preparing for, or that she's saying she wants to do. Tomorrow, Hillary Clinton, a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton is being headlined by a leading neoconservative thought leader named Robert Kagan. People are really concerned about things like that. And I think it's interesting because that sort of represents the reasons for the Never Hillary contingent. Whereas on the other side, on the Never Trump side, it's more people, I think some people to an extent are concerned about Trump's language and rhetoric, but Trump's language and rhetoric is just a couple degrees cranked up of what Republicans have been doing and saying for a long time now about immigrants and Muslims. So in reality, a lot of it has to do with they don't know if they can trust Trump. They don't know if they can trust that Trump is going to be, the right kind of war president, and the way that Hillary Clinton is. And that's why you see a lot of neoconservatives fleeing. A lot of the Never Trump people are actually led by neoconservatives. And those are the people who are fleeing towards Hillary Clinton or saying that they're not going to vote for Trump, period.
Yet the thing that I think is really fascinating is that both really do not want the public to see parties that are not united behind their nominee. And so you saw that, like, having anybody in the RNC that wanted to register their vote for Cruz, for Kasich, for anybody other than Trump, that was something that they weren't going to allow. So they had a voice vote. I imagine that you're anticipating, as you go into the DNC, that Hillary Clinton is probably going to be even more ferocious in the ways that they come up with paths or rules that they can use so that Sanders people are not able to register their support for Sanders or register their opposition to Hillary. Why don't we just talk for like the last thing here about this issue of unity? So much of establishment media or corporate press is around this idea that everyone has to unite behind this candidate. Why is that such a flawed concept, particularly?
Well, I think the problem is that we have a two-party system that only that's telling us we're only offering you two options. It's Hillary or Trump, right? And people, that's unacceptable to large amount of people do not like either candidate. It's actually like striking. It's sort of unprecedented, right? How many people don't like either candidate. And so it's not really a democracy when you don't offer people anything else. But in terms of both parties, yeah, there is this clampdown on anybody who dissents. I think it's actually a little bit more difficult for the Democratic Party to clamp down than the Republican Party, because with Democrats, they had a primary that was largely between just two people. It was Sanders and Clinton the entire time. So people who are dissenting against Clinton are almost entirely behind Sanders, and they represent a larger chunk of the party, whereas Donald Trump was going up against a lot of people. So it's not like just Cruz supporters or just Rubio supporters. It's a lot more mixed. So there's not even really unity among the dissent, right? But there is a lot of unity among the dissenters on the Democratic side, and so I think that's why it's going to be a little bit harder to suppress support for Bernie Sanders. And I think that's why we saw such contentious debates during the platform committee, drafting committee hearings, is because it was like the Sanders camp and the Clinton camp. I do have to say, though, there is something that's new that's happened in the last couple of weeks since Sanders endorsed Clinton, and that is that a certain segment of Sanders supporters have sort of joined in that suppression, that effort, and I mean, they've started to join in rhetorically, at least, that effort to sort of suppress any dissent and just say, okay, everybody, now it's time to just get behind Clinton, and swallow your pride and vote for her because we have to defeat Trump. And in doing so, they're also spending a lot of time denouncing third-party candidates and basically telling anybody who plans to vote for Jill Stein, for example, that it's a vote for Donald Trump. And it's kind of funny because it's like, a vote for Jill Stein doesn't just automatically add a vote for Donald Trump. It's almost like some people seem to think that it actually does. But the point is that there's a lot of dissatisfaction, and regardless of even that contingent of people, I think there's going to be a lot of unrest inside the DNC. I don't think it's going to go through swiftly. I don't think people are all going to get behind Clinton, and so that's something that I'm really interested in covering, because as much as they want to show unity, there isn't unity. There is a fracture in the Democratic Party. It may not be as extreme seeming as the Republicans, but it's there, and I don't think it's going to go away.
And so let's wrap with that point, because I think one of the things that's really incredible, having covered this for the last 8 years, and I'd like to put to you, is it does seem like there's this overwhelming segment of people who supported Sanders who are now open to third-party politics, or open to going outside the two parties. It's definitely going to be a point of contention throughout the week. Whether you continue to try and transform the Democratic Party, people will have their own righteous viewpoints about that, and then there are going to be people who have their own righteous viewpoints about working outside the Democratic Party. When you look at what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, what do you think about the interplay between the Jill Stein campaign and then the Bernie Sanders campaign, and maybe like what kind of potential it has, because it does seem like nobody's satisfied with this endorsement that Bernie Sanders gave to Hillary Clinton.
Well, and polls are showing that it didn't make that much of a difference among Sanders supporters, especially millennials. In fact, 50% of millennials who supported Bernie Sanders are saying that they're not going to vote for Hillary Clinton, and they're totally open to a third party, and that is huge. That's unprecedented. I mean, that's an entire generation that thinks completely differently about third-party politics. And so I think that there is a split among Sanders supporters when it comes to this issue that's going to play out. It does seem to be there is a certain generation of people, group of people who are Bernie Sanders supporters who seem to have been, I guess you could say, traumatized by the year 2000, right? They've really allowed the propaganda about Nader taking the vote from Gore, which anybody who's watching who does think that that's what happened. There were more Democrats that voted for a Republican that year than voted for Gore, and a lot of people who did vote for Nader weren't going to vote for Gore to begin with. So regardless of that, I mean, that has really, turned people off for the rest of their lives, it seems, from even entertaining the idea of third party. And so instead of putting their efforts into building something independent and outside the Democratic Party, or at least supporting it or cheering it on, they spend their time deriding people who even dare to want to vote for a third party, even consider a third party, as being spoilers, as being people who are going to get the right wing elected. They've bought into this lesser evilism. And then you have someone like Cornel West, who supported Sanders very strongly. Cornel West himself is a radical. We've watched him, at the Democratic platform hearings, speaking up on behalf of Palestinians, on behalf of social justice issues with the TPP, to the environment, to labor. And the point is that Cornel West, after Sanders endorsed Hillary Clinton, he said, I really do respect Bernie Sanders, but I don't agree with him. I think Hillary Clinton will make this world more unsafe, and that's why I'm supporting Jill Stein, and he endorsed Jill Stein. And so I think there's a bigger split than ever on this issue. I think that there's never been a time, if you're going to build a third party, anything, there's never been a better time than now because there's so much support for it. And at the same time, I don't think Hillary Clinton's going to lose to Donald Trump. So I think that there's a huge opportunity, and it's interesting to watch some people among Sanders supporters really just not, even be able to entertain the idea of, hey, maybe it's time to build something outside. I think it's fine that people want to work inside the Democratic Party. I don't necessarily agree with it completely, but I think it's fine. It's not a bad thing to have people on the inside, but I also think it's necessary to have people working on the outside and building something different that can at least pressure the Democratic Party like in decades past. And so I think we need that. And I think it's really like that's going to be one of the biggest fault lines, I think, when it comes to not just the DNC, but even moving beyond the DNC, is going to be about third-party candidates, because there is so much interest for the first time in a long time in the idea of voting for a third party.
Well, thank you for talking to us, and everyone will be able to see your reporting next week. It'll be up at shadowproof.com, and yes, as you say, we'll be very interested in the people who still have a stake in what happens in the DNC because they're going to be delegates, because they'll be there either fighting for the Trans-Pacific Partnership to have stronger language against it in the platform, or because they want to actually vote for Bernie Sanders on the floor and register that they were supporters of Bernie Sanders during the election, which I know the Democratic Party will not want to happen. And then there's going to be thousands of people in Philadelphia protesting, and so we're going to look forward to all the coverage that you have. So everyone, Rania Khalek's on Twitter at Rania Khalek, and we'll be retweeting and sharing all of our posts throughout the week. So we hope everyone will enjoy our coverage, and we'll see you next week.